When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm oldish.
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Today, we're happy to have as our guest, Paula Prober, who is a psychotherapist, and someone I came across on Substack a few weeks ago. The Substack algorithm put a post she had written on my feed in which she said that she was an oldish psychotherapist. And I said, oh, that sounds good to me. And I wanted to get to know her. So I reached out, I read some of her posts, and she has a very interesting concept that she calls the Rainforest Mind. I definitely want to hear more about that. And I thought all of our listeners would like to hear more about that too, because a very high percentage of people who think of themselves as oldish also think of themselves as being different and not run-of-the-mill in many respects. Welcome, Paula, and we're very glad to have you come on.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for finding me.
I was just thinking as you were talking, Greg, that Paula, what you're talking about and what you've created as far as this new way of thinking about some of the way our brains work is stepping out of the box. And that's the theme of our podcast, is stepping outside of the box as far as what aging means, and even coming up with a word that not that many people are using, of oldish. So it feels like a great fit for today's conversation. Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to talk about it. One of the things that I thought would be helpful, this is kind of starting in the middle, but I can go back to the beginning. I started with this Rainforest Mind concept when I was kind of middle-aged. I changed careers middle-aged, but I didn't start my blog and writing about this until I was in my 60s. So I'm 73. I've been blogging for about 10 years about this Rainforest Mind idea. So I just thought, oh, this would be good for people listening. You know, you're never too old to start something new. That was one message that I thought would be useful for your listeners. But going back to how this started, my first job out of college was as an educator. I was a 6th grade teacher. And I had a couple colleagues who told me that the way I taught would be a good way to teach gifted children. At that point, I was in my 20s. I didn't know what a gifted child was. You know, what are you talking about, gifted kids, right? So I did a little research and I looked into it, and I got a job teaching. This was in Pennsylvania in a pull-out program where in the school district, they were identifying their gifted children and pulling them out of the regular classroom to give them some more intellectual stimulation that they weren't getting in the regular class. So I got to know what it meant to be gifted. And of course, that's controversial. And there's a whole discussion about what is it? What's giftedness? Schools back then were mostly using IQ tests and checklists. But that was my introduction to these kids who thought out of the box, who were creative, who were deep thinkers, highly sensitive. They had all these characteristics that were unusual. They were lonely. They couldn't find other kids like them. And so I started teaching them in these pull-out programs and did that for a while. And then when I was 39, I went back to school and got my master's in counseling. And then I started a practice where I focused on this population in my counseling practice. I knew they had particular mental health needs that were not understood by therapists to a large extent. And you'd think, oh, they're smart, so they'll be fine. That's kind of like the assumption oh, you'll be successful and you'll make a lot of money and you'll be the CEO of a company in no time. And it's like, not necessarily.
And
True.
you should be happy. You know, as a kid, you should be happy because all of this comes so easily to you and you've got it made. We don't even need to pay that much attention to you. A lot of teachers have responded in the past like that kid's fine.
Exactly. And they're not necessarily fine. Yeah. Yeah. So I ended up starting this practice in my, I guess it was early 40s, working with that population in my counseling practice and doing parenting workshops and a little bit of therapist training. Not until my 60s did I start the blog. I was kind of like, what else can I do? I needed some creative project, which periodically I would get bored and need something else to do, which is a trait for the rainforest-minded person, right? You don't necessarily stay in one career your entire adult life. You have lots of interests and lots of things you can do well, and you want to try different things. It's called multi-potentiality, and that's also something that's misunderstood. It's like, why can't you focus? Why can't you do just one thing? Why don't you stay in one job? So I was interested in doing something new along with my counseling practice and started blogging in my 60s. And that ended up opening up. I got a small press, wanted me to write a book. So I wrote my first book for them. And then I have since written a couple other books all about this topic of understanding your rainforest mind and the importance of that and the particular mental health issues that come with it. Like Janet, you just said, particularly in school, this is what happens to kids in school, and they're not understood and they don't necessarily reach their great potential, as we call it. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a quick rundown.
You and I have a similar path. I was an educator for a number of years in the classroom and then other avenues. And I decided to go back to school to become a psychologist in my 50s. And now I have my own practice.
And start a podcast in your 60s.
That's right. And I have found I work a lot with kids, but also all ages now. I learned early on that the assumption is that if a child is showing the rainforest mind, they're going to be fine and they're going to be good and well behaved and well balanced in all that they do. And instead you see these big gaps when a child that has this kind of brain is doing really well, and then often it's social skills or something that's not going that well. So much of what you wrote about or write about as far as, helping kids and grownups accept and celebrate being outside the box. It's hard. It's not what's in general encouraged.
Right. It really isn't. And I've been in this field since my 20s, many, many years. It hasn't changed a lot over all those years. In the schools are still kind of not understanding these kids and having those same assumptions, the same myths. And so, yeah, there's still a big need for therapists to have this understanding so that when they go to therapy, you get that part of them. I can see the relief when they get to talk about their struggles because there's no place to talk about it.
So that might be a fourth book, which would be for kids about their rainforest mind.
That is a great idea, actually. I have thought about that. I might do that. My third book is a journal. It's a guided journal for adults, though, because there are books now on raising gifted children. For years, parents were on their own and they were struggling. Now, in the last maybe 10, maybe even 15 years, there are therapists who have the training. There are some parents of gifted children who have become coaches. And there's more out there now for the parents of gifted kids, but very little still for the adults. It's very interesting. So my journal is for a gifted adult to work through writing, drawing, artwork, understanding themselves as a gifted person.
I think I might give that as a gift to one or more of my adult children that might fit into that.
Yeah. Well, you could give it to me. I got a birthday coming up this summer. Well, I could use that.
You both relate to the idea of a rainforest mind.
Oh, very definitely.
In so many ways. I mean, taking away stigma, even saying you're gifted is a label. A lot of other kids would be like, they're gifted. taking away the label. It's broadening the whole idea of what is going on inside of you. I wrote down a quote from when I was reading about you, and it said, excessively curious, idealistic, sensitive, highly intelligent humans. And that's like saying, here's some people that this might help, rather than, oh, okay, this is what you tested on, you're over here. It helps create a sense of you're okay. And this is what okay looks like for you. This is how you can manage in this world with all the.
I came up with that metaphor years ago when I was in education, and I wanted a way to describe to teachers how these kids were different, looking for something other than the word gifted, because that has all these connotations, high IQ and all these things that you've mentioned. And so I thought about people as ecosystems, and some people are like meadows, and some people are like deserts, and some people are like volcanoes, and some are like the rainforest. All ecosystems are beautiful, valuable, and important. This particular type of person, the rainforest-minded person, the rainforest is just the most complex ecosystem on our planet. It's intense, and there's a lot going on, and it's very resourceful, and there's life and death and overwhelming. And, they're just, the metaphor really works well for this population, but everybody's okay. All the different ecosystems are important. That was one way to explain who these kids were to the teachers. It didn't necessarily help them accept the kids, but the kids appreciated it. And now, like you say, the people are not, I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, I'm not gifted, but the Rainforest Mind fits me. I have those characters. I'm highly sensitive, intuitive, I have a lot of interest, and I'm a deep thinker. All those traits that I describe, they fit those traits. They don't necessarily identify with the word gifted, even if they were identified as kids in school, because some of them were, but some of them weren't. They didn't care about school. They didn't do their homework. They didn't follow the rules.
Greg, I know you were about to say something, and I jumped in.
No, that's fine. I'd rather listen to you than to me most of the time. One of the reasons that this resonates with me is that growing up, and for most of my life, I didn't have any way to identify other than I wasn't. One of the things that struck me a lot, Paula, when I was reading some of your posts on Substack, was that term multi-potentiality. When I was younger, I hated the word potential. Absolutely hated it. I was physically gifted, mentally gifted, and artistically gifted. I was like the poster child for that gifted and talented crap. I was an athlete, all of that stuff. And all of the adults around me, the adult coaches, the teachers, everybody, I would hear them talking about me, and they'd say, he's got a lot of potential. What I heard was, he's not good enough, but someday maybe he will be. There was no way for me to feel like who I was seen or valued, because I had this potential. And when I was growing up and people say, what are you going to do, for your life? I said, well, I'm really interested in physics, and I'm really interested in spirituality, and I'm really interested in this, that, and the other. And I could do anything I want. I don't know. I'm not going to do anything, or at least anything that you can see. I'm going to do all of this stuff inside of myself, but I'm not going to do anything you can see. Something else that popped out at me was, you said, I forget the term you used about where gifted education for a long time was grabbing them out of a classroom. And that's possibly the worst thing you could do. Because one of the things that happens, I think, with a lot of gifted, talented, whatever, grabbing a kid out of a classroom and telling the other kids it's because they are gifted and you are not. They are talented and you are not, is a recipe for bullying. I was taken, starting in kindergarten, out of class to take experimental IQ tests. I was like training the AI, so to speak. It was like, we need to have people to test this on. So people who tested really high on the regular IQ test, let's try them on these other ones. They would come in and say, we're going to give Greg an IQ test now. And they would take me out of class. Guess how happy the other kids were that happened to me. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in that. And as soon as I saw that term, Rainforest Mind, I thought, okay, I'm in there. I'm ready to go with that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about the bullying for sure. It's tricky. Ideally, classroom teachers get training on how to work with gifted children within their classroom so the kids don't get pulled out and then bullied. The positive side, what's called a pull-out program, is they finally get to be with each other in a small group. They get challenged and stimulated. We had a lot of independent projects and they could study what they wanted, go as deep as they wanted, and take as long as they needed. No deadlines. I understood them as highly sensitive. And so with a teacher who gets them, that for them, it's tricky. It's a trade-off. But a lot of those kids, that was the reason they came to school. On Tuesdays, they saw me and they tolerated school the rest of the time because they got some understanding and stimulation and got to be with each other. Sometimes in schools, especially elementary school, they don't put the gifted kids together. There are 3 third grades. And so a gifted kid goes in each third grade because each teacher thinks they want those kids. Anyway, so there are arguments both for and against pull-out programs for sure. They aren't ideal, but they have their benefits.
I think I was too early. If there had been a pull-out program where I could go hang out with other Rainforest kids, I would have loved it. But I was pulled out and it was just me. The only major benefit that I remember getting out of this was I was disruptive in class because I had read, my sister was 3 years ahead of me in school. I had already done all of her homework with her. I had already read all those books. I had read every book in the children's library by the time I was 10. So I would be disruptive when it came time for the reading class because they're reading essentially what it seemed to me like they're doing picture books. And I'm reading Dostoevsky. So they decided that there was a girl in my class who was also ahead of the game in reading and some other stuff. And now that I can think of her, and I knew her later in life, she was definitely in the rainforest. What they did to keep us quiet was that they cleared out a space in the coat closet. They put 2 desks in there and said, okay, it's time for reading. You 2 go in that room. It was a coat closet, probably 4 by 8. You 2 go and sit and read. And you can imagine where that went. Diana and I loved to hang out together, but it wasn't the same thing as here's a cohort. Here's a community for you to be part of. I don't think they were mean about it. I went to a pretty good elementary school, but I don't think they were mean about it. I think they just didn't know.
Paul, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about ADHD as related to Rainforest Mind? Because as you were talking, I was thinking about some of those characteristics, being distracted or hyper-focused on the interest you have and that you want to go deeper and deeper. You don't want anyone to bother you and stop you. And so
It's a good question. So there is something in the field called twice exceptionality. Giftedness is one exceptionality. And sometimes gifted folks have other exceptionalities like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, even like anxiety. Sometimes they put as an exception. It's not really, that's not a great one actually, but maybe even something like bipolar disorder or some kind of other special need. So they call that 2E or twice exceptionality. That creates even more complexity and difficulty. That said, ADHD can be misdiagnosed in rainforest-minded folks because the traits are similar in some ways. They overlap, like the don't bother me and going really intense and focused into something. Or if you're like Greg and you're distracted in class, the teacher might label you ADHD because you're really just not interested in what they're teaching because they say you already know it, or you're more advanced, or it's too slow. So what I find is a lot of misdiagnosis because people don't know what gifted looks like or what Rainforest Mind looks like.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious about you and how you did tell us how you got into the whole realm of gifted, talented children through teaching. Was there some personal connection for you around that?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people get into gifted education because when they're raising children and they notice that their children are gifted, they don't identify themselves that way. But like Greg was describing, their child is advanced, or the child is reading when they're 3 years old, or they notice the character, like your kids maybe, right? You notice the traits, you notice they're frustrated in school, you get involved, and that's how you get into the field. So I have not had children. That wasn't my road in. My road in was through teaching and colleagues telling me the way I taught. I was a creative teacher. I didn't use the basic textbooks. I had a independent reading project program where kids were on their own reading and different levels of reading. And so I was more just a creative teacher. And that's how I got into the field. But I loved these kids. I loved being around them and their creativity and their senses of humor. And that was really my way into it. People ask me, so are you gifted? And after all these years, I'm kind of saying, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gifted or not. But I have a Rainforest Mind. I know that. I fit those characteristics. And so I joke with people and I say, there's a spectrum or there's a continuum of gifted. There are like genius people who are at that high end of giftedness. So that's like profoundly gifted is one category they talk about, exceptionally gifted, moderately gifted. And I say, well, I'm kind of on the barely gifted end of the continuum. I'm like, I must have some of that, but I
was thinking, where would that go as far as terminology, from profoundly to excessively to moderate to barely? Not too much, but a little bit. Right. Call yourself gifted, just a little bit.
Yeah. I'm kind of in there somewhere. Yeah, because I understand it. I definitely understand it and love being around those people. But I'm not sure about where I fit. You work with those clients, and there's some that are so brilliant, right? And I'm not that, but I get you, and I love talking to you.
I want to stop for a second because we need to hear the titles of your books for the listeners, and then we will put them on our website. But I thought I'd take a moment so you could share with everybody your books.
Yes. So the first book I wrote, there's a small press. They're called GHF Press. And they asked me to write this book. Parents should know about them. They're a homeschooling group. So a lot of these parents take their kids out of school and homeschool them. I don't know if it's a lot, but a certain number of them do that. So they're the ones who published this book. And it's just called Your Rainforest Mind, A Guide to the Well-Being of Gifted Adults and Youth. It's really I would say the most comprehensive book. It's the first one. If somebody really wants a deeper look at what this is, that's the book to get. Okay. Then I had written my blog for 4 or 5 years, and I thought, I've got this body of work. It's too bad to waste this just on a blog. So I put it into the second book. The second book is really blog posts that are the most popular. I called it Journey into Your Rainforest Mind, a field guide for gifted adults and teens, book lovers, overthinkers, geeks, sensitives, brainiacs, intuitives, procrastinators, and perfectionists. That's one way for people to see, who is this Rainforest Mind in person? It's a great way to kind of describe it. I tell people it's a quick read, and it's a good one to give to people who you want to help them understand you, but they don't want to read the more complicated book. The first book has a lot of case studies in it. This book is just more fun and easy to read because I try to be funny in my blog. And then this third one is the journal. So it's a way for people to understand more about who they are through this. It's called Saving Your Rainforest Mind, a guided journal for the curious, creative, smart, and sensitive. Thanks for asking.
We'll put links to where they can buy books on the show notes and on the website. Preferably not Amazon. If there's a way that people can buy these books not through Amazon, that would be my preference.
Sure.
Because I'm not happy with Amazon these days.
Yes, they go to their independent bookstore and can order them. In Portland, Oregon, there's a special bookstore called New Renaissance Bookstore that carries them. I don't know how many other bookstores might carry it, but you can always go to your independent bookstore and they can order it.
Well,
yeah.
Exactly.
Powell's Books in Portland. You can go online and go to powells.com and order it through them too. So yeah, I like my independent bookstores too.
So I wanted to ask about where you are now in the sense of your journey through Oldishness and where that has taken you.
That's a good question because I am 73 and I feel like, right? We're all that age where it's like, that sounds so old. Just 73. That's old. Medicare and Social Security. but I don't feel old, or
Mm-mm.
that's why Oldish is so great, because yeah, I guess we could say we're elders, but I definitely don't feel like I'm done yet. I'm not sure what I'm doing next. For the first time, I had an injury. So you know how you get older and they say, oh, stuff starts to fall apart. I've been pretty healthy until recently when I injured my knee. So I have frayed meniscus, osteoarthritis, blah, 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 in my knee. So that was kind of like my first experience of, oh, maybe I am getting older. I have an injury now, which was disappointing and frustrating. But I don't know what's next. I think maybe another book, maybe a book for kids or a journal for kids,
Yeah,
And
like a workbook or a journal.
yeah, I've thought about that. I'm exploring. I do some work with sound. There's a whole spiritual aspect to me. And so without going into that too much, it's like there's a channeling thing that I do bring through sound, and it feels like there's some kind of healing energy with the sounds. I'm exploring that with a couple of practitioners that I work with. So it's one of those things, right? I'm guessing your podcast is about keep going. There's more to
Yes.
do, right?
Yes.
What's
Yes.
next? Just because you're oldish, that doesn't matter. What's the next creative thing you want to do? So I'm not actually sure where I'm going to go, but those are a couple things that I thought about.
Yeah, but you know that you're not done growing. You're not done going places. And so that's the difference. Not knowing what to do next. I've never known what to do next until I started doing it. So not knowing what to do next is not old. It's oldish because we don't know how much time we have. When we were kids, it's like, I'll do that when I'm 30. I'll work toward that, and I'll be that when I'm 50. But we don't have any idea how much time we have left. And I think we have a different sense of what accomplishment is. I don't feel like I have to learn how to do something well enough to be professional at it. So I'm not looking at doing that for a career, but I'm having a lot of fun learning how to do the background technology stuff around podcasting and about visiting with people who are helping me learn how to talk to other people and how to listen, where good questions come from. I don't need to know what I'm doing next. I just need to know that I'm not done.
Yeah. Well, I also thought you found me on Substack. That's new. I just got on Substack. Yeah. So I'm exploring that. Yeah. And maybe getting the information out about the Rainforest Mind to a larger audience through Substack.
Yeah, it's working, right? So a whole lot of people, including me, and then from me out to the people who are listening to us. And so that's good. And that's what Substack is for, I think. A lot of people are trying to use it as a way to make a living, but I'm finding that it's a pretty good way to express myself to people that I don't know. That's really hard to do on other kinds of places, but Substack seems like a good place to do it, and it worked right away. 3 weeks ago, we'd never heard of each other. And here we are having a conversation.
Yes.
So
I was just thinking that Dr. Seuss should have written a book for Oldish about all the places we'll go.
So you should write that book then.
Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, did you imagine when you were younger and you were thinking about how old 73 sounds, were you imagining that you would be in this active, creative, kind of breaking out of boxes for others and maybe yourself? What is it like for you to have been on your journey to now?
I absolutely did not imagine this for sure. I think, what would I say? Over the years, I've been a client in therapy. You know how you're a therapist? You need to do your own inner work to be a better therapist.
Yeah.
So I've been a client for years with different therapists and different types of therapies. And that's been really important for my self-confidence and healing and being better at my job as a therapist. I've changed a lot over the years and built up a sense of more confidence. When I was younger, I loved working with kids, actually. I was a camp counselor for years when I was a teenager and all that. And I thought I'd be a teacher that would be my career. I just work with kids. And I did love it while I was there. I did really enjoy it. But at some point, I thought I need to do something different. I had a friend who encouraged me. She said, "You're a therapist. You should get a therapy degree." I was reading everything therapy related and reading about spirituality, mental health, and healing. And so, yeah, then that seemed like the natural next step. for me. Yeah.
It was like your rainforest mind was activating. It was like, okay, teaching, great. Kids, great. Classroom, great. Wait a minute. What else is there?
Exactly. Yeah. That's true. And then I had a little bit of a community theater career in my 20s. That was my social life. I did a lot of community theater for those 10 years, singing, dancing, and acting. And I guess what I'm saying is I liked, you have multiple interests. And so how do you do more of them? Some of it is your job. Some of it is your hobby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's like you were saying, Greg, when kids are young and have a rainforest mind, sometimes it's really hard to sift through all these things. What can I choose for my work? And then what can I choose for my interests that I pursue in my free time? That sometimes can be a big sticking point for kids and adults.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, Greg, when you were talking about potential, it can be a dirty word for, because parents will say to their gifted kids sometimes, and teachers, oh, you have so much potential. And then it becomes a burden. I have to meet my potential, and then they freeze up and then they don't, then they sometimes can't produce anything or be productive because there's so much pressure to be perfect. Perfectionism is another trait in the rainforest-minded person, and part of that is because of the pressure. Oh, you're so smart. Oh, you should, you're going to be highly successful. Yes. You need to win all these awards. Why aren't you getting straight A's?
Yes.
All of those things. Yeah.
Yes. And so sometimes kids with that rainforest mind start to rebel. And like you were saying, Greg, about being disruptive in class, I know I work with some clients who talk about kids that are big into the drug scene, who are sometimes getting really good grades, but kind of checked out, and drugs are a big deal, or not getting good grades and checking out. So it comes in different varieties, but.
One of the things that I hope people will catch on to eventually is that the attention deficit that's part of ADHD, and we used to say ADD sometimes too. But the attention deficit is because nobody's paying attention to that person. I always wondered about that because I don't think that's what they meant when they came up with the term. But the reality is, if somebody really pays attention to that person, they're going to be able to be there to hold them in whatever space they need to be held in so that they can realize some of that potentiality rather than say, oh, you should be this, you should be that, or I don't have any idea. So if people could listen to the idea, I think this could be a real boon for parents and grandparents hearing about that. Oh, this rainforest mind is a whole different way of thinking about it, because practically everything in a rainforest is apex. You might be the apex prey, most popular prey. I do have, by the way, this picture of the rainforest mind. There's a painting by a French painter named Rousseau that I think is called Paradise or something. But it's just all these lush rainforest plants and all of these animals laying down in front of the green background of all the rainforest plants. That's the picture that I have when you say rainforest mind. And there's spiders in there. There's snakes. There's rabbits. There's beautiful butterflies. There's all this kind of stuff. Where do you look? And you sit there and you feel it all. Then you can become successful maybe. But where do you look next is the question. Where do you look next? And would somebody look there with me, please, and help me understand what I'm looking at?
Perfect. That's what I do. Help you understand what you're looking at, right? Help you join you in that experience, because it can be really lonely. That's the other thing I guess I would say. I don't know if I mentioned that right. The loneliness, especially how the more complex the thinker, feeler, gifted person is, rainforest mind, the harder it is to find other people who will go there with you and who will appreciate it.
Yeah, that jumped out at me when I was reading your writing, the loneliness factor. One thing we like to ask our guests while you're with us is our two questions. What is exciting to you about this time in your life as an oldish person? And what scares you at this time in your life as an oldish person?
The scared one first. It is scary. But having that knee injury and thinking about not being able to move and do and go and having to have pain. And absolutely. And I'm single right now, and I never had kids, which I'm glad. I didn't ever want kids. I would rather not be single, but a partner there's no guarantee that you're going to be cared for, I guess, in old age, right? But I think about having a companion getting older, and it's frightening to think about being dependent on somebody else, just being disabled, I guess, right? And I'm forgetting things. Oh no, am I getting dementia? So those are there. But I'm good at compartmentalizing, and so I don't spend a lot of time there. But then the excitement is I just feel like there's more. I'm not done. It's exciting to think about what am I going to create now? And I just love what's such a blessing for me is that having the blog and the books, people around the world find out about me. And I love there are a number of people in Brazil who are studying giftedness, and they have contacted me. I have a client in Sweden. I'm not doing therapy with them because you can only do therapy within your state, right? Mm-hmm. But I can do consulting. And so I get to meet gifted people around the world, and I get to help them understand these characteristics and feel more self-acceptance and more self-love. And I find out, what is it like in Spain? I've got a client in Spain. How does the Spanish look at giftedness, or do they? Or in the Netherlands, there are people in the Netherlands I have a bunch of followers there. They seem to be on it. There's more understanding and acceptance, it seems, of the Rainforest Mind there. That's really exciting, I guess I have to say, working around the world and influencing people.
Yeah. And I can feel the energy from you, and the excitement. And I love that. That's oldishness.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's perfect. One of the things that I would really like to say to you, Paula, as I said to Jen many times and to many of our guests, there's an expression that those of us who grew up during the New Age use a lot, which is namaste, which is a greeting. And a lot of people think it means hello, but what it means is the divine in me greets the divine in you. And as I'm sitting here during this conversation, that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like the divine in the three of us has gotten together and to have this conversation to share with other people. And I really appreciate that. I'm so glad you decided to come on and visit with us. And I do hope that you'll come back and at some point we can, now that we know each other, we can really start to talk. It feels to me like we've just been in the same place for the last hour. And that's a treat.
Yeah,
it is a treat.
Well, I would love that. I was so pleased that both of you understand this. You're both coming from, I know, my kids, I'm like this. It's just like, that was very sweet. Yeah. So I'm happy to come again if you want me.
I'd love to have you. And I wish you the best. And if you write more with your blog and your international spreading of this idea, wouldn't it be awesome if someday in the near future, everyone's talking about rainforest minds instead of gifted and talented and expectations and probabilities and all the things that are talked about now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like a little bit like a legacy. If that concept catches on, I will have left something worthwhile, I guess.
Yes. And you already have.
We'll do our best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will do our best. So, and now I have a project to work on. I want to complete the task of making a time machine so that I can send you back in time so you could talk with the people who were my elementary school teachers and my parents and my coaches and all of that. We'll just have a big meeting and you can explain all of this stuff to them and the world will change immediately. And so we won't be having a talk about how do we tell people about the Rainforest Mind. That'll just be assumed. That's because that's where we all live. I was talking with a friend of mine this morning. She said, what do you mean Rainforest Mind? And I have an opinion that everybody has a rainforest mind, but we have different ways of expressing that, all the way from not at all to what's wrong with that guy? I think that everybody's different. And that's something that's different from when we were kids, everybody was built to be in a box. Here's the box for you. When I was in the second grade, people started telling me I should be a teacher when I grew up. So, okay, put me in that box. I don't know why. Everybody was built to be in a box, and our education system was built to turn out factory workers and bosses. But everybody is different, and I've never met anybody that isn't gifted.
Well, that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
That's another discussion for another time, because I would say not everyone has a rainforest mind. Everyone has gifts. Everyone is valuable, but some people have the meadow mind. They're all wonderful. They're all valuable, but not everyone has these traits of complexity and deep thinking and a certain level of intelligence.
Thank you so much for joining us and for helping us understand more about Rainforest Mind. It's always exciting to be able to find different ways to think about things that aren't judging and compromising people's individuality and making room for everyone. Yay.
Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you both. I've learned a ton. I've had a great time doing it. And so until the next time.
Bye, Greg.
Bye, Jen.
Bye, Paula.
Bye, Paula.
Bye-bye.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We had fun and learned a lot, and hope you did too. Links to purchase Paula Prober's books about Rainforest Mind are in the show notes for this podcast and on our website at www.oldish.me. We are no longer using affiliate links to Amazon. We are now affiliates for bookshop.org. The great thing about Bookshop is that if you purchase a book there, you can choose a local or other independent bookstore, and Bookshop will send them a portion of the purchase price. If you buy a book there after clicking our link, we'll also get a commission that will go towards supporting our podcast. We'll be going back through show notes and web pages of our older podcast to change book links over to Bookshop. Upcoming episodes include a visit with podcaster Jeff Armstrong, host of the podcast Aging Well, a return visit with one of our more popular guests, Joan Price, with whom we'll be discussing her recently updated book, Sex After Grief, and the next meeting of the Oldish Book Club. Stay tuned for these and other guests coming up in the next weeks. Meanwhile, if you like this podcast, please be sure to tell a friend and leave a review at www.oldish.me or wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find us. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there, too, if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. And please don't forget to love everyone.